The late autumn sun hung low over the line of the Arizona Territory, painting the sky in copper red. Winds carried the taste of dry dust, lashing across the faces gathered in the square of Dustville. The town's name sounded like a promise of wind, but today there was nothing in the air but weariness and bitterness. On the warped wooden platform, Naomi Carter stood alone. Her dress was worn thin, the fabric faded after the long journey from the east. Tight curls of black hair had been braided in haste, strands clinging damp to her brow. Her dark eyes did not shine, did not plead. They held only the hard defiance carved deep into her bones. An old glove hid most of her left wrist, but from a tear in the fabric, a long silver scar showed. It curled like a question with no answer. Below the platform, the crowd murmured, "She's scarred. Doesn't look like a meek woman at all. Not a tear, not a word, like she dares someone to try." The auctioneer, a heavy-bellied man in a rumpled vest that stank of whiskey, slapped his ledger shut with a crack. His voice rasped across the square. "Gentlemen, the last bride of the season, Naomi Carter, 24, out of Charleston, reads, writes, no sickness, quiet but stronger than she looks. Who'll take her?" No hands went up. Many had already drifted away. Bearded soldiers snickered. Cattle hands shook their heads. None wanted to shoulder another shadow. Naomi held her ground, back straight, chin lifted. Her lips were cracked and dry but steady. She sought no pity. She showed no weakness. She stood silent while dust coiled round her boots. The auctioneer sighed, began to close his book, muttering, "Well then, that's the end of it. I'll take her." The voice came rough and low from the porch of a dim saloon. The square fell still. Heads turned. Eyes searched the shadows. From the dark stepped a tall man in a long, ragged duster, the brim of his hat shading half his face. A tangle of gray beard lay at his jaw. His coat was dulled with trail dust. His boots cracked with miles. He looked like a ghost shaken loose from the mountains. "Caleb Whitlock," someone whispered. "The one they said died with his wife and children in the Comanche fire." Or so folks thought. The auctioneer hesitated, staring at the money Caleb set in his hand. The amount was exact, not a cent short, not a cent over. "You sure, Whitlock? You never—" A glance from Caleb cut the words clean. The auctioneer swallowed, snapped the ledger shut. "Done. She's yours." Naomi turned, meeting his eyes for the first time. In that ash-gray gaze there was no pity, no cruelty either. Only a weary weight, as though he was dragging himself through another day. "Come on," Caleb said. His voice sounded like gravel rolling in a dry creek. "Night's coming." Naomi did not move at once. Her heart thudded, but her stance held. The crowd's stares pricked her back like needles. Half the town watching. Caleb stepped closer, his rough hand steadying her waist as he lifted her onto the saddle. The touch was brief, but it left behind a heat that smoldered like a coal under ash. Naomi shivered, not with fear, but with the strangeness of it. He mounted ahead of her, took the reins. The horse snorted beneath their weight, then moved. The square sank into silence. No laughter, no blessing. Only red dust swirling under hooves. Folks watched a woman nobody wanted and a man long thought dead ride out together. Naomi sat behind him, one hand on the saddle. Dust stung her face. The smell of horsehide and sweat pressed close. She glanced sideways at the veins in Caleb's hand on the reins, at the hard line of his jaw under the brim. Neither spoke. The sunset stretched across the trail, drawing their shadows thin against the horizon. Behind them, the town lay quiet. No one knew whether to call it a bargain or a beginning. Naomi knew only this. She no longer stood on that splintered platform, and the rough hand that had touched her waist still burned against her skin. The horse labored as it carried them out of Dustville, hooves striking the stony trail. The sun had slipped behind the hills, leaving a sky of ash and a last smear of fire along the clouds. Naomi rode behind Caleb, her hands unsure where to rest. At first she clutched the saddle's edge, but the jolts forced her to set them against his waist. Her fingers brushed the coarse leather of his coat, cold with night wind, yet warm with the body beneath. Caleb said nothing. Each hoofbeat landed like a hammer on the earth. Now and then he tightened the reins, guiding them wordlessly. Naomi tilted her head toward the sky, where the first stars flickered awake, and wondered if she had stepped from one prison straight into another. After more than an hour, they came to a low ridge. Moonlight revealed a cabin crouched against the slope. Its roof sagged with warped shingles. Its corral leaned like it might fold at any breath of wind. No lantern, no smoke, no sign of life. Only stillness, as if the place had been abandoned years ago. Caleb dismounted first. He steadied Naomi with a rough hand at her elbow, never meeting her eyes, then led the horse toward the creaking barn. Naomi waited, braced for command or warning, but none came. Instead, he drew an old iron key from his coat and tossed it lightly into her hand. "The house is yours," he said, his voice low, neither sharp nor tender. Then he turned and vanished into the barn. Naomi froze. The key pressed heavy in her palm. She had never heard such words from a man in this bargain. No rules, no threats, no claim. Only that. The house is yours. Her chest tightened, suspicion tangled with unease. She pushed open the cabin door. Darkness met her, thick with the scent of damp timber and cold ashes. A narrow bed against the wall, a table with 2 chairs, a folded blanket, a loaf gone stale. Not luxury, not a cell, more like a place someone once lived, then walked away from. Naomi set the key on the table. She pulled off her glove and rubbed the scar at her wrist. The silence was so deep she could hear the horse snort outside. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hand trembling. Night settled fast. She coaxed a small fire in the hearth, its glow crawling over the cracked planks. Wrapped in a blanket, she sat at the window, watching. In the yard, Caleb worked with the hay. He spread a blanket on the straw, shed his coat, and leaned against the barn wall. His broad frame hunched. He became nothing but a shadow in the cold night. Through the slit of the curtain, Naomi saw him, unmoving, unspeaking, making no claim on her. He had left the cabin to her alone and taken the wind and the owls for himself. She tightened the blanket round her shoulders. Part of her breathed easier, freed of threat. Another part twisted, restless. Why did he not come inside? Why leave her untouched in the house? The fire popped in the grate, its glow catching Naomi's face. Her gaze clung to the still form outside. The wind rattled the tintal, shingles. Yet Caleb never stirred. He drew the blanket close, head bent, as steady and silent as a stone. She let the curtain fall, though the image stayed with her. A man who had chosen the cold ground rather than cross the door of the house that was now hers. Naomi lingered long at the window, palm pressed to the frosted frame. Distrust still coiled in her chest, but with it, something else. Thin, uncertain, like the faintest spark, that maybe tonight she was not chained, only sheltered. At last she leaned against the wall, eyes slipping shut. Sleep came fitful, haunted by the wind's cry. But even in dreams, she saw the outline of that solitary figure in the barn, a ghost of a man who kept his distance and wondered if this beginning was strange, but not wholly fearsome. The new moon climbed high, silver light spilling across the barren ground around the ranch. That night Naomi lingered by the window long after the fire had burned to ash, embers faintly glowing. Her chest rose hard and fast. Since setting foot here, every breath carried suspicion. Caleb's words, "The house is yours," bound her to nothing, yet that silence weighed heavier than any chain. In the kitchen corner she found a knife tucked in a drawer. The blade was dulled and scratched, the wooden handle split with age, but sharp enough to cut cloth. Naomi gripped it, her hand trembling. The steel felt cold in her palm, a sliver of hope she could cling to. Outside, wind rattled the fence. Dry grass stirred under the pale moon. She wrapped herself in a thin shawl, slid the knife into her boot, and eased the cabin door open. The hinges groaned, seizing her breath in her throat. She froze, listening. From the barn came a faint stir, perhaps Caleb shifting in his sleep on the hay. But no footsteps followed. Naomi slipped into the night, each step crunching gravel loud as drumbeats. She fixed her gaze on the dark line of trees beyond, the trail out of town. She had no notion where it would lead, only that it must be away, far from this strange silence. As her foot crossed the low fence rail, a voice rumbled from the shadows. "Where are you aiming to go at this hour?" Naomi jerked, her hand clamping the knife. From the barn, Caleb stepped forward, tall under the moon. He stood bare-handed, no gun, no rope, only a figure still as a post, blotting out the light. "Move aside," Naomi rasped, her eyes hard. She drew the blade, moonlight flashing along its edge. Caleb did not stir. The wind tugged at his coat. His voice came steady, low, unhurried. "Wolves are out yonder. They don't care who you are. They won't wait for you to scream." Naomi swallowed, sweat slicking her palm. The knife trembled. He knew she meant to run, yet he neither lunged nor commanded. He stood rooted, stone and shadow. She clenched the handle, stepped back half a pace. Her voice quavered, though the words were sharp. "I'm not afraid of wolves." Caleb moved one step closer. The space between them narrowed to a handful of strides. Their shadows overlapped in the moonlight. His eyes dropped to the scar at her wrist, its silver line exposed, speaking what she would not. "I'm no jailer," he said. "You can go. But if you go, go for good. Don't look back. The world out there has no mercy for the lone." Naomi lifted her chin, met his gaze. For the first time she saw no mockery, no claim, only the long fatigue of a man worn hollow, carrying a sorrow unnamed. The knife shook in her hand. Her heart thudded faster, whether from his words or his eyes she could not tell. She felt herself standing on a threshold. Beyond lay darkness and teeth. Behind lay a cold cabin where a stranger had left her the bed. At last her breath broke out. She turned, walking back, toward the cabin. The knife hung at her side but no longer raised. Her shadow stretched across the dirt, blending with his. Passing near, she caught the smoke scent clinging to his coat, the weight of his breath. Caleb said nothing. He only turned his head, eyes following. Naomi felt her gaze caught in his longer than she meant, her chest tight as she crossed the doorway. She closed the door, peered once through the crack. He still stood beneath the moon, tall and still as a pillar. Then he turned, limping faintly toward the barn, some old wound in his stride. Naomi pulled the blanket close around her shoulders, her heart heavy. The tension between them had not broken, but it had changed its shape. No longer the iron of defiance, but a thread invisible, binding her to what she could not yet leave behind. Morning in Dustville came with the crow of roosters and the smell of damp earth after night's dew. Naomi woke as pale light slipped through the cabin's cracks. Outside, the steady thud of an axe struck wood. Thok, 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 measured, heavy as the heartbeat of the land. She wrapped her shawl and opened the door. In the yard, Caleb stood by a pile of logs near waist-high. Each swing of the axe drew the muscles in his arms taut, sweat marking lines across his faded shirt. Naomi did not call out, did not greet. She only watched the wood split and stack neat against the porch. When at last he set the axe aside and glanced her way, their eyes met a moment. No words, only a brief nod. Naomi turned back inside. She stirred a pot of cornmeal, the scent of maize filling the small room. On the table lay Caleb's coat, its sleeve torn, seams frayed like old scars. She threaded a needle and stitched the rip, slow and patient. When finished, she folded the coat and left it neatly on the chair. By midday, Caleb returned with a basket of vegetables gathered from the old garden plot. He set it on the table without a word. Naomi looked down at the soil-streaked potatoes, the bent onions, yet each cleaned and chosen with care. She nodded in quiet thanks, then washed, chopped, and laid them in the stew. So the days turned. The rhythm held steady, yet each day carried some small change. One morning, Naomi found a stack of dry firewood already waiting at the porch. Another day, Caleb brought back a new bucket, set by the well to replace the rusted one. He never spoke of these things, never lingered for gratitude. Then came an evening colder than most. Naomi entered the kitchen and found a pair of leather gloves on the table. Small, fine-stitched, supple, dyed deep brown. She slipped them on, fitting close, each finger measured true. She looked toward the hearth where Caleb sat mending his axe. He did not glance up, nor mention the gift. Naomi traced the seams with her hand, her chest tightening. Something unspoken bridged the space, not in words, but in a language neither had been taught. That night she brewed tea from dried leaves in a wooden tin. When she set the cup before him, her fingertip brushed his. The touch was brief, light, but enough to stagger her breath. She pulled back, face burning, tea near spilling. Caleb frowned faintly, startled too, yet did not recoil. His eyes lingered a heartbeat on her face, then dropped to the cup, taking it as if nothing had passed. The moment held, still as a shift in wind. Naomi turned away, ladled water again, her hand unsteady. Inside her rose something she could not name, half fear, half yearning. In the days after, their eyes crossed more often. When Caleb carried water for the horses, she looked up and caught him still. When she bent over the wash at the well, she sensed his gaze from the porch. Yet whenever their eyes met, both turned aside, busying themselves. No thanks were spoken. Yet the firewood was fatin, stacked, the coats mended, the meals warm. Each act small, but together forming a chain unseen, binding them in silence. One night, wind howled harsher than before. Naomi drew close to the window, shivering beneath her blanket, and heard Caleb's steps outside. He passed by, arms full of wood, pausing just a breath. In that pause, his eyes lifted, meeting hers through the slit of the curtain. No word crossed the space, but Naomi felt her heart pound and her grip tighten on the cloth. When he moved on, she sat still, wondering if some languages were spoken only by eyes, by the brush of fingers, by a pair of gloves set down on a table with nothing said. And perhaps, she thought, it was this silence that shook her more than any promise ever could. The news came on, a morning swept with wind. A rider from Dustville tore past, dust rising in his wake, shouting only that ranches to the north had been attacked. He did not stop, only cast his warning into the air before vanishing down the red dirt road. Naomi was at the well, shoulders bent beneath the yoke. She froze, the buckets tilting, water spilling over the ground. A tremor of unease rose in her chest. When she returned to the cabin, she found Caleb sitting on the porch step, a rifle across his lap. He slid a steel rod down the barrel, drawing it slow and sure, clearing every grain of dust. His movements carried the precision of long habit. Naomi halted, sweat prickling her temple. This was not the man who split wood in silence or slept in the barn. His eyes, bent over the rifle, bore another cast, focused, cold, as though the world had narrowed to steel and his hands alone. On the table near the door, cartridges lay in neat rows. Caleb polished each one with a dry cloth, handling them with such care Naomi felt he was tending to fragments of pain. The cords in his neck stood taut, his jaw locked. His chest rose heavy, as if the weight of mountains pressed upon it. She set the buckets down and watched. For the first time, she saw clearly the soldier in him. Not a hermit ranch hand, but a man who had once known blood. And for the first time, she glimpsed in his ash-gray eyes something unhidden: worry. He rose, checked the saddle in the barn, ran his hands over every strap and buckle as if any flaw might cost a life. Naomi stepped to the doorway, her fingers gripping the frame. "Is it truly dangerous?" she asked, voice so low she barely heard it herself. Caleb paused. He did not turn at once, only pulled hard at a leather strap, then answered, rough and steady. "Not here yet, but the wind changes sooner or later." Naomi tightened the shawl around her shoulders. Questions caught in her throat. When he turned, his gaze caught hers. For a moment his eyes burned not with weariness but with vigilance, and beneath it, something she had never seen: fear. Her heart sank. The man who stood unmoved before storm and silence carried a crack within him. That fear was not only for himself. She felt it stretched toward her, toward this ground beneath them. He said nothing more. He slid the rifle into its scabbard, tied at the horse's flank, then bent to knot his boots. Rising, he passed close enough that she caught the faint tang of powder clinging to his coat. Naomi tried to hold his gaze, and in that moment she saw the truth. Caleb was braced to meet violence, not as a man eager for it, but as one who knew what it cost. He stepped into the yard, tested the stock against his shoulder, lifted, lowered. Calm in every gesture, yet his back was tight, muscles strung as though awaiting a command no one had given. Inside, the stew bubbled. Naomi ladled a bowl, her hands shaking so drops spilled on the table. When she set it before him, her fingers brushed the cold, calloused hand that gripped the rifle. Heat rushed to her face as she pulled back. Caleb glanced up, a flicker in his eyes. then gave a single nod. All that day Naomi worked, yet her thoughts circled the look she had seen. Behind his silence there lived a man who still knew fear. Not fear of dying, but fear of losing something unnamed. Night fell, the wind cutting sharper. Naomi sat at the window and saw Caleb at the fence, rifle slung across his shoulder, his frame carved against the moon. He stood long, still as carved wood, his eyes fixed north where smoke columns rose in the distance. In that moment Naomi understood. His silence was not emptiness, but armor over a soul eaten once by war and now dragged back toward its ghosts. And strangely, knowing his worry, Naomi felt her heart tremble, not from fear, but from the sudden sense that perhaps he needed someone near. The blizzard came on a late winter night. From the prairie, the wind howled like devils, striking the cabin walls until they shook. The windows whined in their frames, cold slicing through every crack. Naomi sat huddled by the fire, a blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. The flames flickered against her face, her dark eyes reflecting gold in their restless glow. Through the door's slit, she saw Caleb still outside. He sat against the barn wall, a thin blanket over his shoulders, his hair and coat dusted with snow. He did not move, bowed like stone in the gale. Naomi bit her lip. Since they had come to the ranch, he had never once slept in the cabin. But tonight, the storm raged fierce, and worry surged through her like a tide. She rose and pushed the door open. Wind slammed against her, stinging her eyes with tears. "Caleb!" Her voice cracked, carried off by the storm, but his head lifted. In the dark, his eyes still burned their ash-gray light. "Come inside," she called, fingers trembling on the frame. "You won't last out here." He stood slowly, brushed snow from his shoulders, and strode toward the cabin. His tall frame left deep prints in the drifts. Passing by, the chill of his coat made her shiver, but his gaze was not cold. He spoke no word, only nodded and entered. Inside, the fire roared higher as wind drew through the chimney. Naomi fed it more wood until the flames spread their glow. Caleb sat on a wooden chair, his hands raw from cold stretching toward the heat. His breath still hung in white clouds. Naomi sat beside him, a single arm's reach away. In the close room she heard the rustle of his coat, the heavy rhythm of his breathing. The cabin, too large for one, felt too small for two. Every shift of air made her heart stumble. Caleb stayed silent, shoulders drawn. Naomi noticed the faint tremor in his fingers, though he tried to mask it. She pulled the thick blanket and draped it across his shoulders. As she did, his hand brushed her own, steadying the cloth so it would not slip. The touch was brief, yet it strung every nerve in her taut. She lifted her eyes to his. There was no distance in them now, only weariness, wounds unspoken, and a quiet hunger she recognized at once. Naomi drew breath, still holding the blanket's edge. Caleb leaned nearer, his warmth seeping through the cloth until the storm outside seemed far away. Fire cracked, sparks leaping, their light on both faces. No words passed. When his hand slipped down and closed over hers, Naomi did not pull away. She let it rest, then gently pressed her fingers against his. Their eyes met again, longer, deeper. That night they allowed closeness, not a taking, not a demand, a permission. For once they laid aside fear, set down the burden. Lips found lips in hesitation first, then softened into warmth. Their touches were careful, searching, as if each scar inside was being covered with patience. Naomi's chest heaved as Caleb's arms, trembling, drew her in. He was no longer the stranger who had bought her beneath the eyes of a town. He was only a man, broken, seeking rest in her presence. Outside, the wind shrieked, snow pounded the walls. In the small cabin, they found warmth in each other, filling the emptiness with tenderness rare on this earth. They spoke of no tomorrow. They did not need to. Time held still that night. When the fire burned to ash, Caleb leaned against the wall with Naomi in his arms. His breath was heavy but steady, his face nearly at peace. Naomi rested her head on his chest, eyes closed, a calm flooding her she had not known in years. By morning, pale sunlight pried through the boards. Naomi stirred, adjusting the blanket on her shoulders. Caleb was already awake, crouched by the hearth, coaxing the fire back to life. His face had returned to its quiet cast. Neither mentioned the night before. Neither spoke of it. Yet when Naomi handed him a cup of tea, their fingers brushed again. She looked up, and in his eyes something had shifted, no longer hidden, no longer cold. A fire had been kindled, quiet, enduring, burning where darkness had once ruled. The snowstorm had not yet left its scars when another storm came the next night, this time not of nature. Naomi first heard it in the frantic barking of dogs by the barn. She was folding blankets when the door burst open and Caleb entered, rifle slung, his eyes like ice. "Stay inside, bolt the door." His voice was clipped, but beneath it ran a tremor. Before Naomi could speak, hoofbeats thundered outside, shouts splitting the dark. Then came the crackle of fire catching wood, red light spilling through the cracks. Their ranch was the target. Caleb strode out, his tall frame etched against the blaze. Shots rang, each one sharp as iron splitting the night. A man dropped by the fence, another screamed and vanished into dust. Through the door's gap, Naomi watched, trembling. Caleb no longer the silent man of hearth and chore, but a soldier, precise and cold, every move honed by war. She pressed her hand to her chest, heart hammering. Firelight carved the lines of his throat, veins taut, his breath heaving. Over the din, he shouted back toward her, "Cellar, now!" But her feet would not obey. She stood frozen, eyes locked on him. Then it happened. Through smoke and fire a figure broke, a boy, no more than 14, face painted red and black, eyes burning. In his hands a crude spear aimed straight at Caleb. Caleb raised his rifle, barrel leveled at the child. Time stopped. Naomi saw his finger tighten, his shoulders tense, his eyes widen, but the shot never came. His arm shook. He did not fire. For a breath that stretched endless, man and boy stared into each other's eyes. Then Caleb lowered the gun. The boy faltered, fear and hate flashing, then spun and fled into the trees. Naomi gasped, nearly collapsing. Caleb still stood, rifle limp in his hand, shoulders trembling. The others, seeing their comrades fall, broke and scattered, leaving only fire and blood on the ranch yard. Silence followed, broken by crackling flame and Caleb's ragged breaths. Naomi pushed the door open, stepping into the glow. She looked at him, the man who had saved her, yet spared one who might have killed them both. "Why?" her voice rasped. Caleb did not meet her eyes. He dropped the rifle, braced his hands on his knees, breath heavy. "I couldn't." Naomi moved closer, her fist tight against her dress. "Couldn't? You let one who could have taken both our lives walk free." At that, Caleb raised his face. His ash-gray eyes flared, not with anger, but with pain raw and deep. You think my hands haven't spilled enough? I shot, I burned, whole villages, women, children. I was cavalry, I followed orders. I did it all. Naomi froze. His confession struck like a hammer. Caleb turned toward the flames licking the barn's roof, his voice rough with grief. I gave the commands. We torched homes, drove them from their valley. When I came back, there was only ash. And in that ash, I saw my own child's face. I killed them, not with my rifle, but with the orders I gave. He clutched his head, fingers digging as if to tear the memory out. Naomi stood trembling, torn between pity and fury. She pitied the ghost chained inside him, yet raged that he let the past bury every moment of the present. You can't live in guilt forever, she cried, tears brimming. You let the past rule you, and now it decides whether we live or die. Caleb met her eyes, despair carved deep. I don't deserve to live, Naomi. I've only been dragging myself through the days, waiting for the earth to take me. Naomi stepped back, her chest twisting. He was at once her protector and a man broken beyond repair, both shield and prisoner of his own hand. Flames roared, devouring the barn's side. Naomi gripped her shawl tight, her eyes locked on him. She wanted to hold him. She wanted to strike him. She ached for his pain, and she raged at his refusal to lay it down. By the time the fires were beaten back and the ranch lay quiet in smoldering ash, Naomi sat at the cabin door. Her gaze followed Caleb's back as he slumped against the fence, his rifle discarded in the dirt. She knew the night's battle had not been only with raiders. It had been with the ghosts that bound him. And within her, a choice began to form. Uncertain yet firm, she would not leave, but she would not let him live as though already dead. The morning after the night of fire, the ranch looked like a wound carved into the earth. Black ash clung to the yard. Smoke stung the timber, the clothes, even the hair. Caleb had not spoken since sunrise. He moved in silence, stamping out embers, his eyes hollow as though he too had burned away with the flames. Naomi worked inside the cabin, her hands trembling as she set things back in order. She needed motion to keep her heart from breaking apart. In the corner, beneath an old blanket and a saddle, she found a wooden chest. It was small but heavy, its lock rusted, lid loose. She sat, hesitated a breath, then opened it. Inside lay bundles of papers tied with string, yellowed by years. She drew one envelope out. The handwriting was steady, bold, the same hand she had seen Caleb use to carve marks into posts. The letter bore 3 names: Elena, June, Abigail. Naomi read the first lines, and her blood ran cold. I was wrong the moment I brought you and the girls to this land. There is no room here for gentle arms, for cradles, for lullabies. I gave the order to burn. That order destroyed not only their village, but our home as well. I say I still live, but the truth is I died with you in that fire. Naomi dropped the page, her hand shaking. Each word cut deeper into the image of the man she thought she knew these past weeks. He was not only a survivor. He was a penitent soul, writing letters to the dead who would never read. Her fingers brushed the other envelopes, some stained with blurred ink, as if by tears. Others scrawled in haste, words jagged, torn with guilt. I shot, I slashed, I drove them into flame. Tonight I saw my daughter's face in the eyes of the boy with the spear. The door slammed, startling her. Caleb stood there, the light from outside framing his figure. In his hand, the rifle still hung, soot smeared across his face. His eyes fell on the chest, then on the letter in Naomi's hand. For a heartbeat, he turned to stone. Then he lunged, snatching the page, his eyes blazing. "What the hell are you doing?" His voice tore out raw and jagged. Naomi stepped back but did not lower her gaze. "I was cleaning. I didn't mean. Caleb's hand shook, clutching the paper. "You opened it. You read it. These are not for anyone else's eyes." He strode to the hearth and hurled the letter into the flames. It caught at once, curling black, the words turning to smoke. Naomi stood stricken, the firelight carving his clenched jaw, his sweat-beaded brow. "You don't touch my past!" Caleb roared, voice breaking, the cabin trembling with it. Naomi trembled too, but held her ground. She looked into his ash-gray eyes and saw not only fury, but fear and the weakness he had hidden behind silence. "You can burn the paper," she said, her voice soft yet cutting. "But you can't burn the past. You already buried them, and still you keep digging the grave." Her words struck. Caleb froze, breath ragged, his hand gripping the table until the wood creaked. Their eyes locked, hard as blades crossing. Naomi did not look away. "You live like a shadow, Caleb. You think that is penance? All you're doing is burying yourself deeper each day." Caleb gave a broken laugh, bitter and hollow. "You don't understand a damn thing." "I understand enough." Naomi stepped closer, her voice trembling yet steady. "I know what it is to live with a wound that never heals, to wake each day and wear a scar like a name. But unlike you, I don't let it swallow me whole." The room went still, save the crackle of burning paper. Caleb stared long at her, his eyes red-rimmed, his chest heaving. Naomi stood just as firm, fists clenched, her pulse pounding. No one won. No one yielded. At last he turned, slammed his fist into a post. Wood cracked under the blow. His voice came guttural. "Get out of my sight. Now!" Naomi stepped back, chin still raised. "You can drive me from the room, but you cannot drive off the truth you carry." She spun, walking out, leaving him in smoke and ash. Behind her, Caleb stood rigid, the fire not only devouring the letters, but tearing down the fragile walls he had built to keep the world out. That night, Naomi sat alone on the porch, her eyes on the cold scatter of stars. Restlessness gnawed her. She pitied him for the weight he could not set down. She raged at him for gripping the shovel still. And deep inside she knew what had passed was only the beginning. That afternoon, the wind stilled, as though the whole prairie held its breath. Caleb rode into town for powder and salt, leaving Naomi behind. Before he left, his words were few. "Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone." Naomi nodded, her face calm, though inside the quarrel over the letters still echoed. By sunset, she went to the well to draw water. Golden light shattered across the dry earth. She leaned down, gripping the rope. Then a shadow closed in. A sack dropped over her head, cloth stuffed against her mouth, her body seized hard. 3 men, the stench of whiskey and sweat. They bound her wrists and dragged her toward the woods. Naomi's vision spun, breath smothered. Their laughter scraped her ears. "This one'll fetch good coin at the border. Whitlock's woman, eh? Let's see if he comes running." She kicked, clawed the dirt with her heels, but it was useless. Terror pressed her throat, her heartbeat pounding wild. When Caleb returned, the cabin door swung wide, the bucket overturned, water darkening the ground. He froze. Instinct flared. His eyes caught the strange boot tracks in the mud leading into the trees. He did not hesitate. He mounted, loaded his rifle, and spurred hard. The horse tore the trail, and in his mind thundered only one word: Naomi. In the forest clearing, the kidnappers tied her to a tree. One brandished a knife, another rifled through her things. Naomi's breath came sharp, her wrists raw and bleeding beneath the rope. Her eyes darted, searching for escape, finding none. Hooves pounded. The men turned. Caleb burst from the trail like a ghost, rifle raised. The first shot cracked, dropping the sentry. The others shouted, yanking Naomi close as shield. Caleb leapt from the saddle, charging into the open. The rifle roared again, grazing the shoulder of the man with the blade. Chaos broke loose. Steel flashed, gunfire split the clearing, curses rattled the air. Naomi fell hard, bound and helpless, eyes wide with terror. A knife arced toward her. In that breath, Caleb lunged, his body intercepting the strike. Naomi heard the sick sound, saw the blade sink into his side. Blood surged, soaking the leather of his coat. He staggered but swung back, slamming the attacker down with the rifle's stock. Naomi screamed, tears spilling. "Caleb!" He did not answer. His breath was ragged, yet his arms still fought, dropping the last man with a crushing blow. Then silence fell, broken only by rustling leaves and his gasps. He stumbled to her, knees buckling, hands bloodied as he cut the rope. When the last knot gave, Caleb collapsed against her shoulder, hot blood spilling over her dress. Naomi caught him, pressing both hands to the wound. "Don't close your eyes. Do you hear me? Don't you dare close them." A faint, broken smile touched his lips. "Long as you're safe." Her tears streaked down, falling on his smoke-stained face. "You fool. I don't need you to be a shield. I need you alive." His eyes fluttered, breath hitching, blood spreading dark. Yet his calloused hand still found hers, gripping tight, clinging to life. In the clearing's hush, Naomi pressed her forehead to his. Her whisper shook. "You will not leave me. Do you hear?" His lids lifted a fraction, a dim light flickering still. He gave the smallest nod before slumping fully into her arms. That night, Naomi dragged and heaved, hauling him back to the ranch. The horse snorted, lathered, while she bore his weight, her dress drenched red. Every step was a prayer. When at last the cabin door shut behind them, she laid him on the bed, her hands scarlet. Outside the wind moaned, but inside there was only the sound of his heavy, faltering breath. Naomi laid her palm over his chest, felt the faint beat beneath. Fragile, but alive. And she knew with a fierceness that burned that she would give all she had to keep that flame from dying. After the chaos on the hill, the ranch felt like a wrecked ship that had barely escaped the storm. Caleb lay curled on the old bed, his blood-soaked shirt replaced with a damp blanket Naomi had pressed against him. Fever dragged him into restless dreams, his breath pounding like surf. His eyes stayed half shut, his lips moving faintly, as if calling to ghosts only he could see. Naomi sat beside him, weary but watchful. She had washed the wounds with warm water, poured liquor to clean them, wrapped them with clean cloth. Her hands no longer shook as they had in the beginning. The work had grown deeper than instinct. It was a vow she carried in herself. When she tied the bandage across his side, she felt his teeth grind and heard his sigh cut low through his lips. The cabin smelled of burnt tobacco, spirits, and the sharp tang of bandages. a scent she knew too well from living among men weathered on the plains. Naomi wiped her hands, turned the damp letters she had found in his chest. These were the heavy stones Caleb had carried. Yesterday she had read them alone. Tonight she chose to read them to him, not to accuse but to pull him back from the darkness that had chained him. She sat close, her voice soft, steady, like a lullaby. "Do you remember the last letter you wrote to Elena?" She gave a faint smile, though sweat salted her lips. "Let me read it for you. Not to judge, only so you know your words have been heard." Caleb stirred in his fever, lids heavy, but his face tilted as if listening. Naomi opened the letter, her tone drifting yet firm. "My love, I know now that orders are no excuse. I gave the command to burn." She paused, letting silence carry the weight. Then she read on, words broken with sorrow, each one once meant for the dead. From time to time she looked at him, his wound bleeding dark beneath a rough bandage, sweat streaking his brow. Even through fever his eyes would flicker open, unfocused, finding hers. Naomi did not turn away. She read slowly, word by word, pressing the memories into the air so they might lose their power to crush him. Between them hung a silence dense as stone. The letters were no courtroom, no absolution, only small boats carrying pain across the gulf. Naomi read until her voice fell to a whisper, as if soothing a child to sleep. She laid her palm against his forehead. His skin burned like kiln-heated clay. Yet his breathing eased, his face slackening in brief release. Night settled, wind sliding across the eaves. Naomi changed the dressing again, her hands practiced, sure. Each time she touched him, her heart trembled in ways she could no longer call mere duty. When the binding was done, she pressed a damp cloth to his brow. His lips parted, then his eyes opened, clearer than before. In them shone worry and gratitude unspoken. "Naomi," his voice rasped, the sound of a man who had lived too long in silence. "Why are you still here?" The question fell like a stone into breaking the night. Naomi froze. She had once told herself the reasons: safety, shelter, a place in this harsh world. But looking at him, broken and alive, all those reasons felt thin. She bent closer, her words steady though her breath shook. "Because I too wanted to disappear. I ran from place to place thinking I could escape the ache in me. But running never healed what lives inside. I'm still afraid. But I don't want to vanish anymore. Not as someone the world forgets." Caleb listened, his lips trembling to catch her words. "You could leave. You could go back to Charleston, or down another road." He closed his eyes, a fractured smile tugging. "I'm not something to be kept. I'm ash of my own making." Naomi took his hand, folding her smaller, warmer fingers around his calloused ones. "You are not ash," she said, voice trembling but firm. "You are a man who lived, who saw his wrong, and is still here. You saved me that night. You don't need to pay with death. Redemption is to live on, to let yourself see another day." He searched her face as though seeking light where he had none. "I'm afraid," he whispered. "Afraid nothing I do will ever be enough. Afraid you'll see me only as guilty." Naomi shook her head, tears spilling but her smile holding. "I don't need you perfect. I need you here. I need you to stop digging your own grave." The cabin stilled. Caleb's hand clenched hers tight, as though letting go would mean losing everything. Naomi leaned down, resting her forehead against his hand, letting warmth pass between them. All through the night she stayed. Each time his breath faltered, she stirred him, refreshed the cloth, whispered small stories to draw him back. When fever carried him deep, she read again from the letters, not to summon guilt, but to prove his voice had not been lost to smoke. By dawn, his breathing slowed, sweat cooling on his shirt. His eyes opened to see Naomi asleep on the chair, her hand still clutching his. He watched her. The tousled hair, the weary face softened in peace, lips pressed as if holding silence gentle. He lifted his hand with effort, tightening his grip around hers. A silent vow. Naomi stirred, eyes opening, meeting his gaze. They held it long, both of them knowing the moment had already remade their lives. On the table lay letters, their ink smudged and charred, but between them sat a man still alive, and a woman who had chosen to remain. And in that quiet, no words were needed. They would try to walk forward together. Spring came late. The last scraps of snow melted on the hillsides, trickling down into streams that cut through the grassland. The ranch still smelled faintly of old smoke and blood, but inside the cabin the hearth glowed warm. Caleb's wounds had begun to knit, and Naomi kept to her rhythms, sweeping the porch, tending the garden, keeping the fire alive. One morning, as the first sun streamed through the cabin's cracks, Naomi was hanging blankets to dry when hoofbeats thundered in the distance. Dust rose on the road. A small caravan rolled into Dustville, stopping before the church and the saloon. Word spread quick, drawing townsfolk in clusters. Naomi and Caleb were called to come. Caleb walked slow, still favoring his leg, yet his tall frame hushed the crowd. Naomi moved beside him, hand clutching her skirt, her heart unsteady. She did not know what awaited, only that the crowd's eyes bore down like judgment. Then he stepped out, a man finely dressed in a gray long coat, face pale and polished, so different from the frontier's worn grit. His eyes mirrored Naomi's, black and deep, though cold and proud. Naomi Carter. His voice was clear, formal. I am Samuel Carter, kin from your father's line in Charleston. The family sent me. They regret letting you stray so far. They send with me letters and coin to redeem you. The crowd stilled. Samuel pulled out a heavy leather pouch and dropped it before them. Gold clinked, gleaming in the sun. Twice what that cowboy paid. His eyes cut to Caleb, sharp with disdain. The family will forget the shame. All you must do is come home. Naomi froze, her breath caught, every gaze fixed on her, waiting for her to bend. Beside her, Caleb's face hardened to stone. He said nothing, but his hand clenched tight. Naomi saw it, the fear inside him. He believed she would go. He believed he was not enough. Naomi drew a long breath. Then she stepped forward, her voice ringing against the hush. No. A single word, striking like an axe into earth. Samuel's brow furrowed. You refuse? Don't you understand? This is your chance to return to family, to honor, to a life worthy of you. Naomi shook her head, black hair falling over her shoulders. I understand too well, but I am not merchandise. I cannot be bought, and I will not be redeemed like a debt. Murmurs rippled. An old woman whispered, Lord, the girl dares say this before the whole town. Samuel pressed, voice sharp, holding out a sealed letter. The family wishes you back. They offer forgiveness. Naomi cut him off, firm as steel. I do not need forgiveness. I have done no wrong. I was sold once. I will not let it happen again. Silence dropped heavy. Caleb turned, eyes wide, as if unsure he had heard right. Naomi met his gaze, then stepped closer, taking his scarred, calloused hand in both of hers. Simple. But before the whole town it thundered louder than any speech. I choose to stay, she said. Her voice was steady as iron. Not because I was bought, not from debt, because I want to. Caleb's hand stiffened in hers. In his eyes a light flickered. Fragile, alive, something he thought long buried. Samuel stumbled back, face red with fury. You're mad. You choose a sinner, a broken man. The family will never... Naomi squeezed Caleb's hand tighter, her eyes sweeping the crowd. I do not need family to choose for me. I do not need the world to set my price. I need only this truth. I will not run anymore. And I will not let anyone touch my freedom again. The crowd stood hushed until scattered claps broke out. A man nodded. A wife reached for her husband's hand. They understood, for all in Dustville knew what it was to be despised, cornered, treated as less. Samuel looked around, saw no ally left. Grinding his teeth, he heaved the gold back onto his horse. So be it. You've chosen your ruin. As the wagons rolled away in a cloud of dust, Naomi stood firm in the center, her hand never leaving Caleb's. Her chin lifted, eyes alight. Not the girl sold off, but the woman who had chosen her path. Caleb turned to her, his gaze trembling. For the first time in years, he did not see himself as a man chained to guilt, but as one chosen. And in that moment, as their hands locked tight, Dustville bore witness to a rare thing. Love not bought, not redeemed, only chosen. Spring wind stretched across the prairie like a soft blanket. Green shoots rose after long barrenness, shining bright beneath the morning sun. After seasons of fire and blood, Caleb's ranch now carried the sound of roosters, the faint smoke of cooking, and footsteps that no longer echoed alone. The day came without music or liquor, but with the quiet strength of those worn thin by storms. Toward evening, neighbors from Dustville rode in. They brought warm bread, jars of honey, and goat's milk. No one asked for flowers. No one demanded finery. They had come only to witness the moment when two souls, once standing at the edge of ruin, chose each other in the light. Naomi stepped from the cabin. She wore again the faded dress, the very same garment once judged proof she was little more than a traded good. Yet now it was clean, each tear mended by Caleb's rough stitching. The seams held firm, like the hands that had forged iron, split wood, and borne her through storm. Sunlight touched her shoulders, making her dark skin glow. Her hair was braided neat, pinned with a small wooden comb Caleb had carved in silence. She walked slow, but no longer with trembling steps. Caleb waited in the yard, under the wide sky. In his hand lay a ring of iron, not gold, not silver, just a rough band hammered from an old piece of steel found in the barn. He had shaped, ground, and polished it with patience. It was the only gift he trusted himself to give, because it bore the mark of his hands, not borrowed from another. The wedding began without preacher or decree. Only the wind sang over the grass, children laughed soft in the circle of neighbors, and an old woman's voice cracked with age. If these two choose freely, then we bear witness, No paper needed, only sun above and earth beneath. Caleb lifted his eyes to Naomi. Once shadowed, his gray gaze shone clear with resolve. He took her hand, scarred palm closing over her firm, slender fingers. His voice was low, roughened like stone. Naomi, I have nothing but these hands. Yet I vow to use them to raise a home, to shield, to uphold you. I will not forget the past, but I will not let it bury us. From this day, if you choose me, I choose you, not bound, not forced, only free. Naomi's smile trembled, tears bright but unshed. She tightened her grip, her words carrying strong for all to hear. I was once sold. I once believed I was only a thing to be traded. But you gave me what no one else did, the right to choose. Today I stand here not because I was bought, not because I was told, but because I want. And I choose you. The crowd hushed, the prairie itself listening. Caleb's hand shook as he slipped the iron ring onto her finger. It did not gleam like gold, nor fit with perfect measure, but it was warm, warm with forge fire, with sweat, with will. Naomi glanced at the ring, then lifted her face. Her smile opened fully, not the smile of survival, but the smile of a woman laying foundation for new life. Without waiting, Caleb bent and kissed her. It was open, unhidden, his arms drawing her close. The neighbors erupted in claps and shouts. Yet in that instant, the world narrowed to two hearts, breath mingling, promise sealed without a word. When they parted, eyes still locked, it was as though a covenant had been carved deeper than parchment. Around them, the neighbors nodded, their eyes alight, not for spectacle, but because they saw a circle close, from chattel to chosen. That night, when all had gone and silence returned to the ranch, Naomi stood on the porch. She raised her hand, feeling the rough iron circle press warm against her skin. Caleb came behind, draping his old coat over her shoulders. She turned, meeting his eyes. "You know," she whispered, "this circle needs no gold, no silver. It is enough, because it is true." Caleb nodded, his gaze deep and steady. He touched the ring lightly, then cupped her cheek. They said nothing more, listening instead to the rhythm of two hearts steady as one. On the porch beam, Caleb carved words with his blacksmith's knife. Naomi read, her eyes misting. Love chosen, not forced, can mend even the deepest scars. Beneath that endless prairie sky, the circle had closed. Love did not rise from force, nor bloom from coin. It came from hands that held fast through cold winds, from eyes that dared face old scars, from courage to choose. Caleb and Naomi had stepped beyond pain and scorn into a home simple but unshakable, where an iron ring shone brighter than gold, because it was forged of faith and heart. And you who have walked long years know this truth. Old wounds seldom heal clean. Yet sometimes, one hand that stays, one honest word, is enough to stitch even the deepest tear. If this story stirs your memory or faith, share with us in the comments. Tell us, do you believe love can mend scars that have lived so long upon the soul? Like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts. We welcome every voice, for out here on the plains, each Wild West love story finds its strength in the company of hearts who still believe.